Jade Simmons here. I am proudly coming before you as the only independent candidate for President of the United States. This is the daily debrief where I give you a peek into my vision of the world by bringing you my take, a fresh take, a new vision on what's going on around us, and also allowing you to understand how I see not only the world, but how I see the people in it. I truly believe that how our leaders see us determines how they treat us. If they, how they value us, how they understand our place in the world will determine the decisions that they make on our behalf. If you want to learn more about Operation Restoration, you're going to go to operationrestoration2020.com. But I'll tell you the long and the short of it. We exist, I am running, because we know that many millions of Americans feel like we do, which is politically homeless. We look around, we don't see our faith being represented powerfully. In fact, we feel it's being misrepresented. We look around, we see certain demographics drowning while others are prospering. And in the meantime, we see two political parties using all forms of demonization, all forms of separation to further divide us. And that division is profitable for them to stay in power or to attain power. We believe it's time now for a fresh take, a new vision, and it must be a restorative one that dares to cut through the division and go beyond even bipartisanship. If you look right now, bipartisanship only lasts as long as the crisis stands. Once the crisis subsides, and we're seeing it not even take that long before we're even on the other side of this, we've already succumbed to division. We've already succumbed to confusion and chaos. I mean, if we're still trying to figure out how to handle this pandemic, who's thinking about how to handle the next one? Who's thinking about what restarting the economy really looks like for people, not just for profit? What does that really look like? What are we doing right now to already prepare for what will be a new normal, which I dare say I anticipate, because where was status quo getting us? And when I say status quo, I'm talking about what's offered to us from both sides. I believe we have a current status quo, and I believe our other option is to return to an older form of status quo. We're better than all of that. This is not about personality, it's about vision. And when I decided to run, it was because I wasn't hearing a voice that was saying we needed to be done with politics and needed to begin prioritizing people. I was done watching two sides spend more time fighting each other than they were fighting for the American people. And I was tired of feeling like nobody was going to dare look for common ground. It's uncommon common ground, but it exists. Nobody was looking for an opportunity for unity. And I say this wherever I go, whether I am speaking, teaching, preaching, writing, posting. If you see a void, if you see an absence of something that needs to exist, you must. It is your personal mandate to offer yourself up to serve as some part of that solution. And so you're going to learn more about that at operationrestoration2020.com, where you'll find our three pillars are very familiar. We're looking to really work to become one nation under God, indivisible. This is a pre-recorded episode of the Daily Debrief. And so I'm going to keep it short, but I would love, as always, your comments, your questions, and I'll do my best to respond to you as I have time. I'm just going to come before you and say, quite honestly, I'm disappointed to see the confusion and the division continuing to prevail even now. I had hope that we would continue at least bipartisan efforts. We did that to get the stimulus bill. We've seen that in the way that Americans have been working to help each other. I always start with good news. Let me back up and say that in Chicago, they were excited that for the first time in history, their cages were empty, that people had literally adopted every dog and cat in the shelter. Of course, by the time of this report, they're probably already picked up a few more strays, but they said they had to literally start a waiting list. They've never seen that in the history of the shelter, at least for the people who currently work there. What does that tell us? Yes, it's good news for the animals. Yes, it's good news for the new animal owners. It's good news for us. Shows that we have greater capacity than we even knew for compassion, greater capacity for service and for generosity in a time where we could rightfully be self-focused. That's what American individuals are doing. That's what American citizens are doing. But what is our leadership doing right now? They're being divisive. There's chaos. We're flip-flopping. And I think what we're looking at now is not just a lack of leadership, but a lack of operating in authority. If you've been watching long enough, you know that I really go out of my way not to call names off and not to bash either side as being more right or more wrong than the other, but I see an equality in terms of how they both played an incredible role in creating an extreme level of division in our nation. So I make no apologies for calling that out on both sides. But what I like to do is focus on where is the opportunity for unity. So right now, I believe what we're seeing, and when I talk about what we're seeing, I'm talking about this inconsistency in our ability to be able to trust our government. The government is we're supposed to know instinctively, and when I say our government, I'm talking about not only the current administration, but all of our leaders in government. We want to be able to know that what they are proposing for us is not about politics, that they are always prioritizing people over profit. I think we saw something very dangerous in the beginning because the president didn't exercise a certain level of authority that he did have, according to most experts and constitutional experts, to at least tell us that it was in our best interest to shut down as much as possible across the nation. We saw a lot of flare-ups there where there were governors definitely who backed him and said he does not have the right to tell us how to behave as states. And other governors who said, look, we need some more leadership, some more authority coming from the top. They wanted to see a heavier hand in terms of making more of a nationwide mandate is probably too strong of a word, but more of a nationwide recommendation that would have us mostly doing the same thing 50 states over. There's so much we know now about the virus that we didn't even weeks ago, and especially months ago. But the information we have now shows that a stronger, more complete shutdown could have prevented a lot more loss of life and could have us seeing a quicker road to recovery in terms of economics. But I believe that because we didn't see the president exercise that authority in the beginning, what we're seeing now is now about to be a flare-up where when he's trying to exercise authority in terms of restarting the economy, he's going to have pushback on that as well. And so what happens is whenever we're unable to trust the motives of who's in charge, we're going to be slower in our response and we're going to not trust the recommendations that are coming to us. So what I'm curious about this week, I'm talking about equal outrage. I'm curious to see now, because the same people who were saying the president had no right to shut us down are saying the president has the right to open us up. Now, in fairness, we are seeing governors on both sides of the aisle flexing against the president's comment the other day about having total authority on that. But here's the issue. The issue is that we must always know without a shadow of a doubt that our leadership is acting on the behalf of the greater good of all of the American people. But when you have leadership that is so polarizing, each side then begins to question the motives of the other. So you have Democrats wondering if everything the president does or says or requires now is about re-election, about posturing and positioning for his base. You have Republicans and supporters of the president wondering if everything the Democrats are proposing is really a ploy to trap the president. Maybe everything they're doing is about sticking it to the president. Maybe everything they're doing is so that they can lay blame at the president's feet. It doesn't matter which side you're on. All that matters is no matter which side you're on, division is the only outcome. Chaos is the only outcome. Confusion is the only outcome. I believe now that we need leadership that no one can pin down as being in the camp of either side. We need leadership now that we can begin to trust so that we know whenever they speak, they are speaking for the good of as many people as possible. That the things they're concerned about now during the crisis are not about either looking like the savior of the country or looking like the smartest person. I'm talking about both sides here, depending on who's talking on any given day. but that when leadership speaks, we know now that the recommendations are truly about what's going to benefit us as a nation. What you're seeing now is that we're beginning to drown in the division much earlier than I thought. I said earlier that I'm disappointed because I honestly thought we would go a few weeks more with seeing a display of bipartisanship. We saw that in the passage of the stimulus. Everybody's really working together suddenly to get the economy moving again, to get people recovering again. The reason we're moving in unity is because for the first time, this thing has taken everybody out. You can look back at the housing crisis, the recession in 2008. It didn't affect everybody. So you had a lot of the country that was able to keep on moving, business as usual, people who were good, their mortgages were fine, businesses who were good, but COVID has touched everyone from the top to the bottom, economically speaking, from rich to poor, economically speaking. So for a few brief moments, there was solidarity because everybody needed help. You notice nobody was wondering who was going to pay for this. Nobody was asking that. Nobody, at least publicly, nobody was calling it socialism when we were bailing out big businesses as well as needy people, as well as middle-class people who suddenly saw their incomes freeze. Small business owners like myself who suddenly had to wonder how many weeks more of payroll can we cover. There was solidarity in the crisis. It wasn't an equalizer because everybody's recovery is going to be different based on the means they had before the crisis. But you need to know now that if leadership, scientists on the left and the right are suddenly talking about the effects of COVID-19 on African Americans, and we're suddenly concerned about why is this affecting African Americans, we have to know that that leadership is going to care about African Americans after the recovery. If this was suddenly affecting or disproportionately affecting senior citizens, we're going to have to care about senior citizens after this. What kind of access to healthcare did these demographics have before? What kind of conditions were these demographics living in before that made it so whenever there's a crisis, those demographics feel it heavier? This economic crisis is going to hurt a lot of people coming out of this as well. We have to care. We're caring about suddenly the poor, the lower middle class, the middle class now. We have to continue to care. That means that we're going to have to move into a whole new era of solutions and opportunities and possibilities that we weren't willing to look at before COVID. In order to do new things, we're going to have new leadership. We're going to have people that look at things differently and look at people as valued resources and as human beings, not as constituents that may or may not vote for them. And I believe we need leadership now that is determined to serve you, whether or not you're red or blue, whether or not you voted for them, whether or not you like them or approve everything they say. We need leadership now that will stay focused, on what all Americans need and institute and implement the types of solutions that will benefit the most. So to avoid drowning in divisiveness, we have to ask the right questions about the motives of our leaders. What are they asking us to do? For instance, you saw many pastors refuse to stay at home. Not many. I should make sure that I'm not overstating. We did see some churches insist on gathering over the Easter weekend. I'm coming to you now, not as a candidate, but as a minister, as a person of strong faith. I love Easter. I look forward to Easter every year. But here's what I know in my heart. My ability to celebrate Easter, to worship God, to have faith is not limited to the four walls of the church. My heart goes out to churches who do not have the technological capabilities to be able to go digital. But for those who did or could have and insisted on gathering, I say we all need to be very careful what we call faith over fear. There was one, was governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. He had to make a very difficult decision because he knew there were churches who were going to gather no matter what. I think there were 7 churches across Kentucky who were still considering having in-person services before Easter weekend happened. And in his own words, he decided he was going to have to punish those who gathered and violated the stay-at-home order. It was a statewide order. And he says this, folks, we shouldn't have to do this. I think it's not a test of faith whether you're going to go to an in-person service. Instead, he said, it's a test of faith that you're willing to sacrifice to protect your fellow man, your fellow woman, your fellow Kentuckian, and your fellow American. I think that was really well said. You had others who said, look, the president didn't give me my rights to worship God or to assemble in church, and no socialist government or godless president can take that right away. So remember, I said we must first, in order to avoid drowning in divisiveness, ask ourselves what the motives of our leaders were. Whether or not you like President Trump, if there was a stay-at-home order that you heard clearly coming from him, I'm pretty sure it had nothing to do with wanting to stop your rights to assemble. Any advice that you heard about not gathering, I'm pretty sure was not intended to stop you from gathering because they didn't want you to practice your faith. I agree with Governor Beshear that we have to redefine what faith really is right now. You don't redefine the God that you believe in. You redefine how you have limited yourself in worshiping that God and worshiping with your assembly. I too miss my church. I love to worship. I sing as loud as possible. I go to the front when I can because I want to be what feels like as being as close to the presence of God as possible. So I say this to my fellow people of faith in all respect, because I know how important it is to be with other believers. There's something very wonderful, very magical about being in the same room with people who believe exactly as you do and who believe as fervently as you do. But I think we have to now ask the right questions. You say, are people asking me now to stay at home? First of all, why am I talking about this? Because my concern now is that we need to be focused not only on surviving this crisis, but thriving through it. And then we also need to be simultaneously focused on pandemic proofing the nation. I'll be speaking more about my concept of pandemic proofing the nation, what I feel is needed going forward, because I do unfortunately believe, I don't say this in fear, I say this in what I believe is founded in fact. If we're being reasonable, if we are paying attention to history, we will likely see this again, and it won't be another 100 years, it'll most likely be sooner. And I think this was a big test of our readiness that we did not pass. And that's not to lay blame at anyone. It no longer matters at this point. What matters is, what do we do moving forward? And so the question we have to ask is, what is the motive behind the hearts of the people who are asking me to do this thing? So you ask now, are people asking me to stay home so that they can take away my right to go to church? Or are they asking me to stay home in order to slow the spread and speed the recovery? Are people asking us to stay home so they can take away our right to make money, to profit, to be profitable, to prosper, to make ends meet? Are they trying to take that away? Or are they trying to slow the spread and speed recovery? We also want to ask questions like, does this sacrifice represent me giving into fear? The sacrifice of staying at home, let's say. Does that represent me giving into fear? Does it represent me doing what's proven to be best, not just for me and my health, but for others around me? Which is the next question. Am I also exercising faith by doing the right thing or by doing the hard thing? That's also faith over fear. We want to make sure you're not fearing that your faith is going to suffer because you're not within the four walls of your church. We want to make sure that you're not fearing that people are taking away something they cannot take away from you. We learned that from Jesus himself. You cannot take away our faith. You can kill us and not take away our faith. So that means that missing a few Sundays, as painful as it is, does not kill our faith. So could you also be exercising faith over fear when we do the hard thing of staying away from the assembly we love? Another question, does me standing for my right violate someone else's right? That to me is going to be one of the most crucial questions we have to ask in our new normal. Does my right to assemble, my right to work, my right to get back to doing the things I want to do, do I have that right over someone else's right to health, right to life? I believe if we're going to be pro-life in one area, in terms of caring about the lives of unborn babies, which I care fervently about, then we must be pro-life in all areas. I call it being pro-human. You must care about life at all times. So that means that as much as you want to exercise your First Amendment right, as much as you want to be around your brothers and sisters in the faith, as much as you want to go back to work and do what you're used to doing, if you really care about those around you, then you'll do the hard thing and stay at home. Why am I talking about staying at home right now? It's because the president is talking very seriously about getting things rebooted. Many are questioning whether or not that's because he really feels it's safe to do so, or because he wants to make sure that the economy is up and running in time for the re-election. Some may say that's a cynical point of view, but if you look at history, every incumbent president has never had to worry about being ousted from office as long as the economy is good. That's historical. Do your own research, check that out. Every incumbent stays in office as long as the economy is good. You ask George Bush the first, you ask Carter, you get out of office when the economy is doing poorly. So I would imagine if the president has political strategists worth their salt, that they're saying, look, this economy needs to look a certain way in time for the election. And what we're going to have to now demand is that our leaders care more about serving the people in real time than they do about their re-election into the future. You say that's unrealistic. Nobody cares that way. I'm telling you, I care that way. I care that way. And I don't believe I'm the only one. I believe that we now need to be electing leaders who care more about doing the service in the moment, even when it is not popular, but they know they're saving lives or saving people's well-being or even saving livelihoods for the future. I care about the economy. I want us to get to a level of affordability that really, when we say the economy is working, the economy is good, it truly is working for everyone. We hear that phrase right now that the economy was the best it's ever been. It's not entirely true. It was the best it's ever been for some people, mostly people in a very high tax bracket and with a very high level of income and wealth. It was not working for many Americans. And so I believe when we get out of this, we don't want to go back to a version of a good economy that only works for some. We're going to have to go and find a new version of a good economy that works for as many people as possible. That's an era of affordability that we must go into. This crisis highlighted that. So you're going to begin to ask these questions, and then I'm going to end with saying this. Let's look at faith over fear. And if you are one of these people out there using that hashtag, more power to you. I believe in faith over fear. The word of God itself says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Don't forget those last three things. He didn't just take away fear. He also gave you love. And that should be looking like us exercising love enough for our neighbors, even the ones who are not going to vote like us or agree with us on everything. We care about them enough to stay home. We love them enough that we don't want to unknowingly play a role in their demise or in their sickness. We have power enough to practice self-control, to practice self-denial, self-sacrifice, so that our preferences are what we sacrifice and not our people. And we have a sound mind enough that we can listen to reason, that we can listen to science. Yes, we can question some things, but at the end of the day, we want to really give room to the experts who have been studying this thing, who know more than we know, who are not just watching the news and reading the headlines, but are in the labs, are watching what's happening in their nations, the nations that have been hit before us, and the nations that will still be hit after us. And they're making recommendations based on what they're seeing. We want to be careful not to get rid of the people who seem like they're doom and gloom, but they're just telling us the hard truth. We want leadership now that dares to tell us the hard thing, even if it makes them more popular, more unpopular in our eyes. Here's the new question you need to be asking about faith over fear. If we're saying we're practicing faith over fear, that must then be your mode of operation. Remember, equality and outrage and consistency in behavior, that must be your mode of operation in everything. If you're practicing faith over fear, that means that you're not fearing that your faith is not going to work outside the four walls of your church. If you're practicing faith over fear, it means that you're not going to fear other demographics, other people who don't live like you, don't believe like you do, don't vote like you do. You're not going to fear them without having any reason to. You're not going to give in to fearing immigrants or people of other races. You're not going to fear being replaced. You're not going to fear Asian people because you think they all brought COVID-19 here. You're not going to buy into what causes us to fear each other, right? You should be practicing faith in that area as well. You're also not going to fear economic doom, that if we wait too long to do what's right, that we are going to crush the economy. That's not practicing over faith over fear. If we're out here prophesying gloom and doom by saying that if we wait any longer, we won't have an economy to recover, that's not faith over fear. I have the faith that we're going to rebound quicker and more powerfully and have less instance for resurgence if we do things right and we don't risk false starting. Here's the restorative stance. I believe that we now have to decide that we make personal sacrifices so that we do not have to sacrifice our people. We have to think long term, even if it's costly in the short term. We believe our belief system, our ability to worship freely, to believe boldly, is not destroyed by our inability to do things as we've always done them. We believe that our movement might be limited, but our faith is not. Our movement might be limited, but our innovation is not. Our movement might be limited, but our ability to rebound will not be if we do the hard thing first. Lastly, we use crises as a time to institute powerful change, not to inject dangerous chaos. Just something to chew on for you there as we begin to proclaim to practice faith over fear. Let's make sure we're doing it in every area, not only saying that when it's convenient or when it applies to the things that we want, and not daring to let's not throw away our faith when we're asked to do hard things. Let's also practice it there and believe that we have the faith to endure the hard things, and that if we endure, we will be able to return to the things that we love, but we get excited that they will look not normal, but that will elevate into a new normal and will do things better, more powerfully, more fairly than we've ever done them before. Okay, I hope that that sits with you. I hope it resonates with you. If it does, do share this. And when you share, let people know why you're sharing. Let them know what part of this resonated, what part of this message hits home, and let them know your vision for what the nation can and will be into the future. Okay, have a great night.